In the shadowed corridors of Raven's Hollow Palace, where centuries of secrets whisper through stone walls, loyalty is tested in ways that textbooks never teach. When a simple palace guard witnesses something that could shatter the very foundation of the monarchy, he faces an impossible choice that will define not just his career, but the fate of the crown itself. This is the story of Marcus Thornfield, a third-generation royal guard who believed his greatest challenge would be standing motionless for hours in ceremonial dress. He never imagined that one rain-soaked evening in October would force him to choose between following orders and protecting the crown he swore to serve. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when one person's conscience collides with the machinery of power. What happens when doing your duty means defying your superiors? What price does honor carry when the very people you're meant to protect become the threat? In a world where appearances matter more than truth, and where a single decision can echo through generations, one guard's moment of courage will reveal just how far some will go to preserve their version of the truth. This is not just a story about palace intrigue or royal drama. This is about the weight of moral choice, the courage to stand alone, and the realization that sometimes protecting something precious means risking everything you hold dear. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Ravenshollow Palace like a shroud of secrets, and Marcus Thornfield adjusted his ceremonial collar for the 100th time that week. 3 generations of his family had worn the same burgundy and gold uniform, had stood at these same posts, had sworn the same oath to protect the crown with their lives. Yet, as he walked the familiar corridors toward his assigned station, something felt different about this particular morning. Marcus had always prided himself on his ability to read the subtle currents that flowed through palace life. After 5 years of service, he could tell when the Queen Dowager Alara was having one of her difficult days simply by the way the kitchen staff hurried through their tasks. He knew when Prince Regent William was struggling with state matters because the man's footsteps would echo differently against the marble floors, heavier somehow, burdened with invisible weight. And he had learned to recognize the particular tension that preceded the arrival of Lady Victoria Ashworth, the prince's second wife, whose presence seemed to shift the very atmosphere of the palace. Today, that tension crackled through the air like electricity before a storm. Marcus paused at the intersection of the East Wing corridor, his trained eyes automatically scanning the ornate wallpaper and gilt-framed portraits that had watched over the royal family for centuries. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with their own secrets. He had been assigned to the Queen Dowager's private quarters today, a post that required absolute discretion and unwavering attention to detail. Queen Dowager Alara, now in her 70s, remained a formidable presence despite her advancing age. She had ruled alongside her late husband for over 3 decades, weathering scandals, political upheavals, and personal tragedies with a grace that had become legendary. Her wisdom was sought by diplomats and ministers, her opinions could sway parliament, and her approval could make or break careers. Yet in recent months, Marcus had noticed a fragility in her movements, a hesitation in her speech, that spoke of the inevitable passage of time. Princess Isabella, the Prince Regent's daughter from his first marriage, had become increasingly protective of her grandmother. At 28, she possessed the same steely determination that had made the Queen Dowager such a respected figure, combined with a warmth and genuine compassion that endeared her to both staff and subjects. Marcus had often observed the way she would sit with the elderly queen for hours, listening to stories of the past, seeking guidance for the challenges that would one day be hers to face. The dynamic between Princess Isabella and Lady Victoria had always been complex, layered with the subtle tensions that inevitably arise when families are reconstructed after loss. Lady Victoria, elegant and accomplished in her own right, had married Prince William 3 years after the death of his first wife. She brought to the marriage not only her own considerable social standing, but also a sharp political mind and an unwavering ambition that some whispered matched her beauty. Yet despite her many qualities, she had never quite managed to bridge the gap between herself and her stepdaughter. Nor had she found a comfortable place in the affections of the Queen Dowager. Marcus took his position outside the Queen Dowager's private study, a room lined with leather-bound books and filled with the accumulated memories of a lifetime in service to the crown. The heavy oak door bore the scars of centuries, its brass handle worn smooth by countless hands. From his post he could hear the soft murmur of voices within, the familiar cadence of the Queen Dowager's measured speech punctuated by Princess Isabella's more animated tones. They were discussing the upcoming state dinner, a grand affair that would host dignitaries from across Europe. The event would serve multiple purposes: strengthening diplomatic ties, celebrating a new trade agreement, and providing an opportunity for the royal family to present a united front during a time when public opinion polls showed concerning trends. The monarchy, while still respected, faced the constant challenge of proving its relevance in an increasingly democratic world. Marcus had been briefed on the security protocols for the evening, the carefully choreographed movements that would ensure the safety of all guests while maintaining the elegant atmosphere expected at such gatherings. Every guard had been assigned specific responsibilities. Every entrance and exit had been mapped and monitored. Every potential threat had been assessed and addressed. Yet something about the preparations had felt rushed, incomplete somehow, as though important decisions were being made without full consultation of the usual advisors. The sound of approaching footsteps drew Marcus's attention. Lady Victoria appeared at the far end of the corridor, her heels clicking against the polished marble with mechanical precision. She wore a dove-grey dress that complemented her platinum hair, and her posture radiated the confidence of someone accustomed to command. Behind her walked Thomas Blackwood, the Prince Regent's private secretary, a thin man whose pale eyes seemed to catalogue and assess everything they encountered. Marcus straightened imperceptibly, his training automatically engaging as he prepared to acknowledge their presence while maintaining his professional distance. Lady Victoria's approach meant that whatever conversation was taking place behind the oak door would soon be interrupted, and experience had taught him that such interruptions rarely led to pleasant outcomes. Lady Victoria paused just outside the study door, her hand hovering over the brass handle as she exchanged a meaningful look with Thomas Blackwood. Marcus, positioned at the proper distance to provide security while respecting privacy, could not help but notice the way her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the way her fingers drummed once against her thigh in a gesture that seemed to betray nervousness beneath her composed exterior. "Is Her Majesty receiving visitors this morning?" Lady Victoria asked, her voice carrying the cultured tones that had been perfected in the finest finishing schools. Marcus nodded respectfully. "Her Majesty is currently in consultation with Princess Isabella, my lady. Shall I announce your presence?"
Something flickered across Lady Victoria's features, too quick to identify but significant enough to register in Marcus's trained observation.
"That won't be necessary. I believe we can wait for a more opportune moment." But even as she spoke these words, Lady Victoria was already reaching for the door handle. The contradiction between her statement and her actions set off warning signals in Marcus's mind, subtle alarms that his years of service had taught him to heed. The protocols were clear. Interruptions during private family consultations required either explicit permission from the Queen Dowager herself or urgent circumstances that warranted breaching normal etiquette. The door opened before Marcus could intervene, revealing the cozy interior of the study where Queen Dowager Alara sat in her favorite armchair, her weathered hands wrapped around a delicate teacup. Princess Isabella occupied the window seat, morning light creating a golden halo around her auburn hair as she gestured expressively while making some point about guest seating arrangements. Both women looked up in surprise as Lady Victoria entered without announcement, followed closely by Thomas Blackwood, who seemed to glide rather than walk, his movements as calculated as a chess master positioning pieces on a board. "Victoria, dear," the Queen Dowager said, though Marcus detected a subtle cooling in her tone. "We weren't expecting you this morning." Lady Victoria moved deeper into the room, with the fluid grace of someone comfortable claiming space wherever she went. "I hope you'll forgive the interruption, Your Majesty. Thomas has brought some concerns about tomorrow evening's arrangements that require immediate attention." Princess Isabella rose from the window seat, her protective instincts clearly activated by the unexpected intrusion. "What sort of concerns? We've been over the preparations extensively." Thomas Blackwood stepped forward, a leather portfolio clutched in his pale hands. His voice, when he spoke, carried the measured tones of someone accustomed to delivering unwelcome news. "There have been some last-minute changes to the guest list, Your Majesty. Changes that necessitate adjustments to both security protocols and seating arrangements." Marcus remained at his post, but every fibre of his being was now focused on the conversation unfolding before him. Years of training had taught him to recognize the subtle signs of brewing conflict, and the atmosphere in the study had shifted dramatically with the arrival of the two unexpected visitors. Queen Dowager Alara set down her teacup with deliberate care, the delicate china making the softest chime as it met the saucer. "What changes, Thomas? And why am I hearing about them now, less than 24 hours before the event?" Lady Victoria answered before Thomas could respond, her voice carrying a note of carefully modulated regret. "I'm afraid there's been a diplomatic development that requires immediate response. The ambassador from Valdoria has requested permission to bring additional security personnel and there are concerns about the implications. Princess Isabella frowned, her protective instincts clearly engaged. Valdoria? But their relationship with us has been stable for years. What's changed? The exchange that followed would be burned into Marcus's memory for the rest of his life. Thomas Blackwood opened his leather portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of official-looking paper, which he handed to the Queen Dowager with an expression of practiced solemnity. Intelligence reports suggest that certain factions within Valdoria have been questioning the wisdom of their current diplomatic stance, he said, his words chosen with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. There are concerns that tomorrow evening's gathering might present opportunities for complications. As Queen Dowager Alara read the document, Marcus watched her expression change from confusion to concern to something that looked remarkably like anger. Her hands, which had been steady moments before, developed the slightest tremor as she set the paper aside. "This is preposterous," she said, her voice carrying decades of authority. "The intelligence community would have briefed me directly about any threats to our diplomatic relations. I've received no such briefings." Lady Victoria moved closer, her manner suggesting concern while her eyes held something else entirely. "That's precisely the issue, Your Majesty. There seems to have been a breakdown in communication channels. Thomas discovered these concerns through his own contacts, which suggests that the usual protocols may have been compromised." Princess Isabella stepped forward, her hand moving instinctively to her grandmother's shoulder in a gesture of both comfort and protection. "Grandmother, perhaps we should verify this information through proper channels before making any changes to tomorrow's arrangements." It was at this moment that Marcus realized he was witnessing something far more significant than a simple diplomatic consultation. The careful choreography of Lady Victoria's entrance, the convenient timing of Thomas Blackwood's discovery, the subtle pressure being applied to an elderly woman who had spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of international diplomacy, all of it pointed to a manipulation so sophisticated that it might have gone unnoticed by someone less observant. Lady Victoria's next words confirmed his growing suspicions. "I'm afraid time is a luxury we don't have, Isabella. The changes need to be implemented immediately, which means certain adjustments to the evening's plans are unavoidable." She produced her own document from an elegant leather handbag, this one bearing official seals and signatures that Marcus couldn't see clearly from his position, but which seemed to carry significant weight with Thomas Blackwood, who nodded approvingly as she presented it. "What sort of adjustments?" Princess Isabella asked, her voice taking on the steely tone that Marcus had learned to associate with the royal family's more formidable moments. Lady Victoria's smile was practiced, professional, and completely devoid of warmth. "Nothing too dramatic, dear. Simply some modifications to the guest list, revised seating arrangements, and updated security protocols. Thomas has worked out all the details." As Thomas Blackwood began outlining these modifications, Marcus found himself focusing not on the words being spoken, but on the subtle interplay of power, manipulation, and resistance playing out before him. The Queen Dowager, despite her age and recent frailty, was clearly suspicious of the sudden changes being proposed. Princess Isabella's protective stance had intensified, her body language suggesting she was prepared to challenge whatever was being suggested. But it was Lady Victoria's behavior that most concerned Marcus. Her carefully controlled demeanor, the way she seemed to anticipate and counter every objection before it was fully voiced, the manner in which she and Thomas Blackwood worked in perfect coordination, all of it suggested a level of planning and preparation that went far beyond addressing a sudden diplomatic crisis. The proposed changes, as they were outlined, seemed designed to accomplish several objectives simultaneously. Certain guests would be relocated to positions that reduced their access to the Queen Dowager and Princess Isabella. Security arrangements would be modified in ways that concentrated authority in fewer hands that Marcus noted would be under Lady Victoria's direct or indirect control. Most significantly, the traditional protocols that governed such events, protocols that had been refined over generations and provided multiple safeguards against both security threats and social missteps, would be suspended in favor of streamlined procedures that Thomas Blackwood had developed specifically for this occasion. Princess Isabella's objections grew more pointed as the full scope of the proposed changes became clear. These modifications would fundamentally alter the nature of tomorrow's event. More importantly, they would isolate grandmother from many of the diplomatic contacts she's cultivated over years of careful relationship building. Lady Victoria's response was swift and seemingly reasonable. "Dear Isabella, I understand your concerns, but we must prioritize security over sentiment. The intelligence Thomas has gathered suggests that maintaining traditional protocols could expose Her Majesty to unnecessary risks. It was at this moment that Queen Dowager Ilara spoke with a authority that seemed to fill the entire room. Victoria, in 60 years of public service, I have never made significant diplomatic decisions based on intelligence reports that I have not personally verified through multiple sources. I will not begin doing so now. The silence that followed was profound, charged with tensions that had clearly been building for far longer than this single morning's conversation. Marcus found himself holding his breath, acutely aware that he was witnessing a confrontation that would have far-reaching implications for everyone involved. Lady Victoria's carefully maintained composure showed the first signs of strain. A slight tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible stiffening of her posture. Small changes that spoke volumes to someone trained in observation. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice carrying a note of barely contained frustration. "I fear that your natural caution may be preventing you from recognizing the severity of the current situation. Thomas's sources are impeccable, and the window for implementing necessary protections is closing rapidly." Thomas Blackwood stepped forward, producing yet another document from his seemingly inexhaustible portfolio. "Perhaps if your Majesty reviewed the specific intelligence assessments, the urgency of the situation would become clear." But Princess Isabella intercepted the document before it could reach her grandmother's hands. As she scanned its contents, Marcus watched her expression shift from skepticism to something approaching outrage. "This intelligence report is dated 3 days ago," she said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. "If these concerns were legitimate, why are we hearing about them for the first time now, mere hours before the event?" Lady Victoria's answer came too quickly, with the smooth delivery of someone who had anticipated this question. "The intelligence community operates on strict need-to-know principles. The decision to brief us was made only after careful consideration of the potential risks. It was a reasonable explanation, delivered with convincing authority. Yet something about it rang false to Marcus's trained instincts. The timing, the coordination between Lady Victoria and Thomas Blackwood, the way their proposed solutions seemed to benefit certain parties while isolating others, all of it pointed to a deception so carefully constructed that it might have fooled anyone less experienced in reading the subtle signs of palace intrigue. Queen Dowager Ilara rose from her chair with the dignity that had sustained her through decades of public service. Despite her age and recent frailty, she commanded the room with a presence that reminded everyone present why she had been such an effective monarch for so many years. "Victoria Thomas," she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I appreciate your concerns for my safety and the success of tomorrow's event. However, I will not authorize changes to diplomatic protocols based on intelligence that has not been properly verified through established channels. Princess Isabella and I will review these materials with the appropriate security advisors, and any necessary modifications will be implemented through proper procedures." Lady Victoria's mask of professional concern slipped entirely for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath the polished exterior. It was a look that Marcus had seen before, though never directed at members of the royal family themselves. It was the expression of someone whose carefully laid plans had just encountered an unexpected obstacle. "Your Majesty," Lady Victoria said, her voice now carrying an edge that made Marcus's hand instinctively move closer to the communication device at his belt, "I fear you may be underestimating the complexity of the current situation. The changes we're proposing aren't mere suggestions. They're essential precautions based on credible threats to your personal safety." The word threats hung in the air like a physical presence, transforming the atmosphere of the study from tense to genuinely dangerous. Marcus felt his training kick into high gear, his awareness expanding to encompass every detail of the room, every possible entrance and exit, every potential threat or advantage. Princess Isabella stepped closer to her grandmother, her protective instincts now fully engaged. "Are you saying that grandmother is in immediate danger? Because if that's the case, shouldn't we be implementing full security protocols rather than simply rearranging seating charts?" Thomas Blackwood's pale eyes flickered toward Lady Victoria, in a look so brief it might have been missed by anyone not specifically watching for such communications. But Marcus caught it, and in that instant he realized he was witnessing something far more serious than a diplomatic disagreement or even a family power struggle. This was the beginning of what could only be described as a carefully orchestrated attempt to isolate and control the Queen Dowager, using manufactured threats and false intelligence to justify changes that would concentrate power in fewer hands, while removing the traditional safeguards that had protected the monarchy for generations. The realization hit Marcus with the force of a physical blow. Every instinct he had developed through years of service, every lesson learned from his father and grandfather about reading the subtle currents of palace life, every warning signal that his training had taught him to recognize, All of it was screaming that the Queen Dowager and Princess Isabella were in genuine danger. Not from foreign threats or diplomatic complications, but from the very people who claimed to be protecting them. As he stood at his post, maintaining the appearance of professional detachment, while his mind raced through the implications of what he had witnessed, Marcus Thornfield faced the first truly significant decision of his career. The oath he had sworn was to protect the crown and serve the royal family. But what happened when those duties came into conflict? What happened when protecting the crown meant defying those who claimed to speak with its authority? The conversation in the study continued, but Marcus was no longer simply observing. He was calculating, planning, preparing for actions that would either vindicate his suspicions or destroy his career. Because if he was right about what he was witnessing, then the next few hours would determine not just the fate of a single diplomatic dinner, but the future of the monarchy itself. The afternoon shadows had grown long by the time Lady Victoria and Thomas Blackwood finally departed from the Queen Dowager's study, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with unresolved tension and unspoken threats. Marcus maintained his position throughout their lengthy discussion, his trained senses cataloguing every detail, every gesture, every carefully chosen word that revealed the true nature of what he was witnessing. As the heavy oak door closed behind the departing pair, Marcus could hear the immediate change in the conversation within the study. The formal, guarded tones that had characterized the morning's exchanges gave way to the more intimate, concerned voices of a grandmother and granddaughter grappling with a situation that seemed to grow more complex with each passing hour. "Isabella, dear," came the Queen Dowager's voice, carrying a weariness that spoke of more than simple fatigue. "Help me understand what just transpired here. In 60 years of public service, I have never been presented with intelligence reports through such irregular channels." Princess Isabella's response was immediate and fierce. "Grandmother, something about this entire situation feels orchestrated. The timing, the pressure, the way Victoria seemed to have an answer prepared for every objection, none of it feels authentic." Marcus found himself nodding almost imperceptibly at Princess Isabella's assessment. Her instincts were sharp, honed by years of observing the subtle machinations of court life. What she lacked in formal training, she more than compensated for with an intuitive understanding of human nature and the complex dynamics that governed relationships within the royal household. The guard's communication device buzzed softly against his belt, indicating an incoming message from the Security Command Center. He glanced at the display discreetly, noting that it was a routine status update, but the timing struck him as suspicious. Throughout the morning's events, there had been an unusual number of such communications, far more than typically occurred during standard palace operations. Inside the study, the Queen Dowager's voice took on the measured tones of someone working through a complex problem. "The intelligence report that Thomas presented, did you notice anything unusual about its formatting or authentication?" There was a rustling of papers as Princess Isabella presumably examined the documents more closely. "The seals appear genuine, but there's something about the language that doesn't match the style of previous intelligence briefings I've seen. It's more theatrical somehow, as though it were written by someone trying to imitate official intelligence communications rather than someone actually working within those channels." Marcus felt a surge of respect for Princess Isabella's analytical abilities. Her observation about the theatrical quality of the supposed intelligence report aligned perfectly with his own, growing suspicions about the authenticity of the morning's revelations. The Queen Dowager's next words carried the weight of decades of experience in navigating the treacherous waters of international diplomacy. "Isabella, I want you to contact Sir Edmund Worthington directly. If there are genuine security concerns regarding tomorrow's event, he would have been informed through proper channels. His response will tell us much about the legitimacy of what we've been presented today." Sir Edmund Worthington served as the head of Royal Protection Services, a position he had held for over 15 years with distinction. He was known for his meticulous attention to detail, his absolute discretion, and most importantly, his unwavering loyalty to the crown rather than to any individual members of the royal family. If genuine security threats existed, Sir Edmund would not only know about them, but would have already implemented appropriate protective measures. Princess Isabella's agreement was immediate and decisive. "I'll contact him within the hour." "But grandmother, what do we do about tomorrow evening if our suspicions are correct? We can't simply proceed as though nothing has happened, but we also can't allow ourselves to be manipulated into making changes based on fabricated intelligence." It was a crucial question, one that went to the heart of the dilemma facing the royal family. How do you respond to threats that may or may not be real? How do you distinguish between genuine security concerns and elaborate deceptions designed to achieve other objectives? Marcus's communication device buzzed again, this time with a message that made his blood run cold. The text was brief and appeared routine. Security briefing rescheduled. All personnel report to alternate command center at 1500 hours. But the source of the message was troubling. It came not from Sir Edmund Worthington's office, as such communications typically did, but from Thomas Blackwood's administrative unit. The implications were staggering. If Thomas Blackwood had the authority to reschedule security briefings and redirect personnel to alternate command centers, it suggested a level of administrative control that far exceeded his official responsibilities as the Prince Regent's private secretary. More ominously, it implied that the security apparatus itself might be compromised, or at least partially co-opted, by whatever forces were orchestrating the morning's events. Marcus made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable just hours earlier. Rather than reporting to the alternate command center as instructed, he would maintain his current post and attempt to gather more information about what was actually happening within the palace's security structure. The risk was enormous. Failure to comply with direct orders could result in immediate dismissal and potential criminal charges. But the alternative, allowing himself to be removed from his position at such a crucial moment, seemed far worse. Inside the study, the conversation had shifted to more practical considerations. Princess Isabella was outlining a plan to verify the authenticity of the intelligence reports while simultaneously preparing contingency arrangements for tomorrow's event that would protect the Queen Dowager without capitulating to the demands that had been made. "We need to assume that our communications may be monitored," Princess Isabella said, her voice taking on the cautious tones of someone who had suddenly realized the depth of the waters in which she was swimming. "Whatever steps we take to verify this information must be done through channels that can't be easily intercepted or influenced." The Queen Dowager's response demonstrated why she had been such an effective leader for so many decades. "Agreed. Isabella, I want you to arrange a private meeting with Sir Edmund, but do so through Lady Margaret's office rather than official channels. If there are irregularities in our security apparatus, we need to identify them without alerting whoever might be responsible." Lady Margaret Fitzgerald served as the Queen Dowager's personal assistant, a position she had held with absolute discretion and loyalty for over 20 years. More importantly, her communications systems were entirely separate from the palace's main administrative network, making them far more difficult to monitor or intercept. Marcus heard footsteps approaching from the direction of the main corridor, the distinctive click of expensive heels against marble that he had learned to associate with Lady Victoria's movements. But these footsteps were accompanied by others, heavier and more numerous, suggesting that she was not alone. The guard's training kicked in automatically as he assessed the approaching group. Lady Victoria's voice carried clearly through the corridor, engaged in what appeared to be an animated discussion with several other individuals whose voices Marcus did not immediately recognize. The tone of their conversation was urgent, almost conspiratorial, quite different from the measured diplomatic exchanges that typically characterized palace discussions. Marcus adjusted his position slightly, maintaining his professional posture while optimizing his ability to observe whatever was about to transpire. The approaching group rounded the corner, revealing Lady Victoria accompanied by 3 men in dark suits whose bearing suggested either high-level administrative positions or security roles. None of them were individuals that Marcus recognized from the palace's regular staff, which raised immediate questions about their presence and authority. Lady Victoria paused when she noticed Marcus at his post, her expression shifting through a series of subtle changes that spoke volumes about her state of mind. Surprise gave way to calculation, then to what appeared to be mild annoyance, as though his continued presence represented an unexpected complication in whatever plans she was pursuing. "Guard Thornfield," she said, her voice carrying the authoritative tones of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I believe you were instructed to report for reassignment. Your continued presence here suggests a failure to follow proper procedures." Marcus felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. The next words he spoke would determine not only his own fate, but potentially the safety of the individuals he had sworn to protect. His response needed to be carefully calibrated, respectful enough to avoid immediate disciplinary action, but firm enough to maintain his position. "My lady, I have received no direct orders from Sir Edmund Worthington's office regarding reassignment. Until such orders are properly authenticated through established channels, my duty requires that I maintain my current post." It was a technically correct response, grounded in the protocols that governed palace security operations. But it was also a direct challenge to Lady Victoria's apparent authority, and Marcus could see the anger flashing in her eyes as she processed the implications of his statement. One of the men in dark suits stepped forward, his movement suggesting familiarity with security protocols. Guard Thornfield, I am Director Harrison from Internal Security Review. You are hereby ordered to report immediately for debriefing regarding this morning's security irregularities. The title and authority claimed by this Director Harrison were troubling on multiple levels. Marcus had never heard of an internal security review department, and the man's appearance and manner suggested backgrounds quite different from the career security professionals who typically managed palace operations. More significantly, any legitimate security review would be conducted through Sir Edmund Worthington's office, not through ad hoc arrangements coordinated by the Prince Regent's private secretary. Marcus made another split-second decision that would have profound consequences. Rather than complying with the order from this unknown Director Harrison, he activated the discreet emergency communication system that connected him directly to Sir Edmund Worthington's personal security office. The signal would alert the head of Royal Protection Services that an unusual situation was developing and required immediate attention. "Director Harrison," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through his system, "I will be pleased to cooperate with any legitimate security review. However, proper protocols require that such reviews be authenticated through Sir Edmund Worthington's office." I have just initiated that authentication process. The reaction to his statement was immediate and telling. Lady Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked entirely, revealing the cold anger that had been simmering beneath her diplomatic facade. Director Harrison and his companions exchanged looks that suggested Marcus's response had disrupted carefully laid plans. But it was the sound from within the study that truly escalated the situation. The conversation between the Queen Dowager and Princess Isabella had suddenly stopped, replaced by the subtle sounds of movement that suggested they were aware of the confrontation developing outside their door. Lady Victoria's next action confirmed Marcus's worst fears about the true nature of what was unfolding. Rather than waiting for proper authentication of Director Harrison's authority, she moved directly to the study door and knocked with the sharp, imperative rhythm that demanded immediate attention.
"Your Majesty,"
she called through the heavy oak, her voice now devoid of the diplomatic courtesy that had characterized her earlier approach. "I need to speak with you immediately regarding a security situation that has developed." The door opened almost immediately, revealing Princess Isabella, whose sharp eyes took in the scene outside the study with the rapid assessment of someone trained to recognize dangerous situations. Her gaze moved from Lady Victoria to the three unknown men in dark suits, then to Marcus, reading the tension in his posture and the warning in his eyes. "What security situation?" Princess Isabella asked, her voice carrying the authority of her position while her body language suggested she was prepared to physically block access to her grandmother, if necessary. Director Harrison stepped forward, producing an official-looking document from his jacket pocket. "Your Highness, we have received credible intelligence indicating that your security may have been compromised by internal threats." Guard Thornfield's refusal to comply with proper security protocols suggests that the compromise may be more extensive than initially believed. It was a masterful manipulation, taking Marcus's legitimate adherence to proper procedures and reframing it as evidence of disloyalty or corruption. The document Harrison produced appeared authentic, complete with official seals and signatures, but Marcus noted that Princess Isabella's examination of it was brief and skeptical. "This document appears to authorize extraordinary security measures," Princess Isabella said, her voice carefully neutral. "But I notice it lacks countersanctuaries from Sir Edmund Worthington's office. Given the scope of authority claimed here, such countersanctuaries would be mandatory." Director Harrison's response came too quickly, with the smooth delivery of someone who had anticipated this objection.
"Your Highness, the urgency of the situation required expedited procedures."
"Sir Edmund's countersignature will be obtained as soon as he completes his review of the supporting intelligence." Princess Isabella's next words demonstrated why she was considered one of the most formidable members of the royal family, despite her relatively young age. "Director Harrison, if you are who you claim to be, then you will have no objection to waiting while I verify your credentials through proper channels. Guard Thornfield has already initiated that process, and we should have confirmation within minutes." The silence that followed was profound and dangerous. Marcus could sense the calculations taking place in the minds of Lady Victoria and her associates, the rapid assessment of options and risks that preceded either retreat or escalation. The fact that they had been called on their apparent deceptions left them with limited choices, none of which were likely to be pleasant. Lady Victoria's decision, when it came, revealed the true depth of the conspiracy Marcus had stumbled upon. Rather than accepting Princess Isabella's reasonable request for verification, she turned to Director Harrison and his companions with a nod that was clearly a prearranged signal. "I'm afraid verification is a luxury we can no longer afford," she said, her voice now carrying the cold authority of someone who had abandoned any pretense of legitimacy.
The intelligence we've received indicates that immediate action is necessary to protect Her Majesty from threats that may originate from within the palace itself.
Director Harrison gestured to his companions, who began moving with the coordinated precision of individuals who had clearly rehearsed their actions.
Their intent was obvious: to gain access to the Queen Dowager's study and implement whatever plans had been set in motion by the morning's fabricated intelligence reports. Marcus found himself facing the defining moment of his career, and quite possibly his life. Every protocol, every regulation, every procedure that governed his duties as a royal guard was now in direct conflict with the immediate threat to the individuals he had sworn to protect. The choice was stark and unavoidable: follow orders from people claiming legitimate authority, or trust his instincts and training in defense of the crown itself. Princess Isabella's voice cut through the tension with a sharp edge of absolute command. Director Harrison, you and your associates will not enter this study without proper authorization. Guard Thornfield, please ensure that our communications with Sir Edmund's office are expedited. It was a clear directive that aligned perfectly with Marcus's own assessment of the situation, but it was also a command that would pit him directly against individuals who claimed superior authority and who clearly possessed both the resources and the determination to enforce their will. Marcus stepped forward, positioning himself between Director Harrison's group and the entrance to the study. His movement was subtle but unmistakable, the shift from passive observer to active protector. His hand moved to his communication device, preparing to send an emergency alert that would bring additional security personnel to the scene within minutes. Director Harrison's response was swift and decisive. Guard Thornfield, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Stand aside or face charges of insubordination and obstruction of lawful security operations. The words carried the weight of official authority, backed by documents that appeared authentic, and individuals who claimed legitimate roles within the palace's security apparatus. Under normal circumstances, defying such direct orders would be unthinkable for a royal guard whose entire career had been built on absolute obedience to proper authority. But these were not normal circumstances, and Marcus had seen too much, understood too clearly what was really happening, to simply step aside and allow the charade to continue. His response, when it came, would echo through the corridors of Ravenshollow Palace for years to come. Director Harrison, Marcus said, his voice carrying the steady conviction of someone who had made peace with the consequences of his actions, I serve at the pleasure of the Crown, and under the direct authority of Sir Edmund Worthington. Until I receive authenticated orders through proper channels, my duty is clear and unchanging. The confrontation had reached its inevitable crescendo. On one side stood Lady Victoria and her associates, claiming emergency authority and demanding immediate compliance. On the other stood a single guard whose grandfather had taught him that sometimes the greatest service to the crown required defying those who claimed to speak for it. Princess Isabella's voice carried from behind him, strong and unwavering in its support. Guard Thornfield's position is correct. Any security measures affecting the Queen Dowager will be implemented only through proper channels and with appropriate authentication. The battle lines were now clearly drawn. What happened next would determine not only the immediate safety of the royal family, but the very nature of the monarchy itself. Because in challenging the legitimacy of Director Harrison's authority, Marcus and Princess Isabella were also challenging the broader conspiracy that had been carefully constructed around them. Lady Victoria's final words before the situation escalated beyond any hope of peaceful resolution carried the cold promise of consequences that would extend far beyond the immediate moment. Very well. It appears that both Guard Thornfield and Princess Isabella have chosen to prioritize their personal judgment over legitimate security concerns. The responsibility for whatever happens next rests entirely with them. Marcus felt the communication device at his belt vibrate with an incoming response to his emergency alert. Sir Edmund Worthington's office was now aware of the developing situation and would be dispatching additional personnel. But would they arrive in time to prevent whatever final phase of the conspiracy was now being set into motion? The answer to that question would determine whether Marcus Thornfield's moment of defiance would be remembered as the action of a hero or the final mistake of a career that had been built on a lifetime of loyal service to the crown. The silence that followed Lady Victoria's ultimatum stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Marcus could feel the weight of history pressing down upon him as he stood at the epicenter of a confrontation that would reshape everything he had believed about duty, loyalty, and the price of moral courage. Behind him, he sensed Princess Isabella's unwavering presence, her determination radiating like heat from a forge. Within the study, the Queen Dowager waited with the patience of someone who had weathered far greater storms than this. Director Harrison raised his hand in what appeared to be a casual gesture, but Marcus's trained eyes caught the subtle signals being exchanged between the man and his associates. The coordinated movements, the strategic positioning, the way their attention shifted to catalog exits and potential obstacles, all of it spoke to military or specialized security training that went far beyond standard palace operations. The communication device at Marcus's belt buzzed with an incoming message from Sir Edmund Worthington's office. The text was brief but electrifying. Irregularities confirmed. Harrison unknown to our systems. Maintain current position. Support inbound. The validation of his suspicions sent a surge of both relief and determination through Marcus's system. He was not going insane. He was not misreading the situation. And most importantly, he was not alone in recognizing the threat that had materialized within the palace walls. Princess Isabella must have seen something in his posture that communicated the change, because her voice took on a new note of authority as she addressed Lady Victoria and her associates. I believe you will find that your credentials are about to be thoroughly reviewed by the appropriate authorities. In the meantime, this conversation is concluded. Lady Victoria's carefully maintained mask finally shattered completely, revealing the cold calculation that had been driving her actions throughout the day. Her next words carried the sharp edge of someone who had abandoned any pretense of legitimacy and was now operating purely from a position of perceived strength. Your Highness, you are making a grave mistake if you believe that your traditional authority structures can protect you from the realities of the modern world. The changes we have proposed are not requests. They are necessities that will be implemented regardless of your personal preferences. The threat was unmistakable, delivered with the confidence of someone who believed they held superior resources and strategic position. But it was also a critical error because it revealed to Marcus and Princess Isabella the true scope of what they were facing. This was not merely a misguided attempt to improve security or address diplomatic concerns. This was a carefully orchestrated coup attempt designed to isolate and control the monarchy through manipulation, deception, and ultimately force. Director Harrison stepped closer to Marcus, his movement carrying the deliberate intimidation of someone accustomed to using physical presence as a tool of control. Guard Thornfield, you have one final opportunity to step aside and allow legitimate security operations to proceed. Your continued obstruction will be noted in your permanent record and may result in criminal prosecution. Marcus had spent years training for moments like this, but no amount of preparation could have adequately prepared him for the surreal experience of being threatened by individuals claiming to represent the very system he had sworn to protect. The irony was not lost on him. In order to serve the crown faithfully, he found himself defying those who claimed to speak with its authority. His response, when it came, was informed by the wisdom his grandfather had imparted during long conversations about the true meaning of service. Director Harrison, my record will reflect that I chose to protect the crown against all threats, foreign and domestic, regardless of the personal cost. That has always been the oath of the Thornfield family, and it will not be broken today. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor, but these were different from the calculated movements of Lady Victoria's associates. These footsteps carried the rapid, purposeful rhythm of individuals responding to an emergency. And Marcus felt his spirits lift as he recognized the distinctive patterns of palace security personnel moving in coordinated response to a threat. Princess Isabella heard them too, and her voice took on the regal authority that was her birthright. Lady Victoria, I believe you and your associates will find that reinforcements are arriving. Sir Edmund Worthington's people have been apprised of the situation and are responding accordingly. But instead of retreating or attempting to explain their actions, Lady Victoria and Director Harrison exchanged a look that chilled Marcus to the bone. It was the expression of individuals who had prepared for this contingency and were ready to implement more extreme measures. Director Harrison reached into his jacket, and for a heart-stopping moment Marcus thought the man was drawing a weapon. Instead, he produced a small electronic device that looked suspiciously like a communications jammer, technology that would disrupt the security systems upon which the palace's protection protocols depended. I'm afraid Sir Edmund's people will find themselves experiencing technical difficulties, Director Harrison said with the satisfied tone of someone playing a card they had been saving for exactly this moment. Communication systems can be remarkably unreliable when subjected to the right kind of interference. The implications were staggering. If Lady Victoria's conspiracy had the resources and coordination to implement electronic warfare against the palace's own security systems, then the scope of the threat was far greater than Marcus had initially realized. This was not merely an attempt to manipulate a single diplomatic event or gain influence over specific individuals. This was a systematic assault on the very foundations of royal security. Princess Isabella's response demonstrated the steel that lay beneath her diplomatic training. Rather than showing fear or uncertainty in the face of these revelations, she stepped forward with the commanding presence that had been bred into the royal bloodline over centuries.
Director Harrison, if you believe that disrupting communications will somehow legitimize your actions or protect you from the consequences of treason, you have severely miscalculated both the resources at our disposal and the determination of those sworn to protect the crown.
As if summoned by her words, the study door opened to reveal Queen Dowager Alara herself.
Despite her advanced age and the morning's stressful events, she moved with the dignity and purpose that had defined her decades of public service. Her presence transformed the entire dynamic of the confrontation, shifting it from a standoff between competing authorities to a direct challenge to the monarchy itself. Lady Victoria, the Queen Dowager said, her voice carrying the accumulated authority of a lifetime spent in service to the realm, I have just concluded a most illuminating conversation with Prince William. It seems that he was entirely unaware of the security concerns you claim to be addressing on his behalf. The revelation hit the conspirators like a physical blow. Marcus could see the calculations shifting behind Lady Victoria's eyes as she realized that one of the key pillars supporting their operation had just crumbled. If Prince William had not authorized the actions being taken in his name, then the entire facade of legitimacy surrounding the morning's events was exposed as fabrication. But Lady Victoria's response suggested a level of preparation and commitment that went beyond simple opportunism. Instead of retreating or attempting to explain away the contradiction, she moved forward with the determination of someone who had crossed too many lines to consider turning back. Your Majesty, I fear that Prince William may not be fully informed about the gravity of the current situation. The intelligence reports we've received suggest threats that go beyond conventional diplomatic or security concerns. Sometimes protection requires actions that may seem extreme to those who have not seen the full scope of the danger. It was a masterful manipulation, taking the natural protective instincts of family members and turning them into weapons of coercion. By implying that resistance to their demands would somehow expose the royal family to greater danger, Lady Victoria was attempting to make cooperation seem like the responsible choice. Queen Dowager Alara's response revealed why she had been such an effective leader for so many decades. Rather than being intimidated by the implied threats or confused by the complex web of claims and counterclaims, she cut directly to the heart of the matter with surgical precision. Lady Victoria, in my experience, those who claim to be protecting others while refusing to submit their actions to proper oversight are invariably serving their own interests rather than those they claim to defend. Your refusal to work through established channels suggests that your true objectives would not withstand legitimate scrutiny. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before assembled knights. Director Harrison and his associates were now faced with a choice: abandon their mission and retreat, or escalate to levels of open confrontation that would make any pretense of legitimacy impossible to maintain. Their choice became clear as additional figures appeared at the far end of the corridor. But these were not the palace security personnel Marcus had been expecting. Instead, they appeared to be more of Director Harrison's associates, moving with the coordinated precision of a well-rehearsed operation. The realization struck Marcus like lightning. The communications jammer had not been deployed to prevent Sir Edmund's people from responding to the emergency. It had been activated to prevent them from coordinating with outside authorities, while Lady Victoria's own security team implemented whatever final phase of their operation had been planned from the beginning. Princess Isabella reached the same conclusion at nearly the same moment. "Grandmother," she said, her voice urgent but controlled, "we need to move to the secure room immediately." The palace's secure room was a hardened facility designed to protect the royal family during extreme emergencies. It featured independent communication systems, reinforced construction, and direct connections to military command structures that could not be easily compromised by the kind of sophisticated attack they were apparently facing. But moving to the secure room would mean abandoning Marcus to face Lady Victoria's forces alone, and Queen Dowager Ilara was not prepared to leave behind someone who had risked everything to protect them.
"Guard Thornfield," she said, her voice carrying the absolute authority of royal command. "Your service today has been exemplary."
You will accompany us to ensure that proper security protocols are maintained. It was simultaneously a recognition of his loyalty and a direct order that would extract him from an increasingly dangerous situation. But Marcus understood that accepting the Queen Dowager's protection would mean abandoning his post and potentially allowing Lady Victoria's forces to secure control of the corridor that provided access to much of the royal family's private quarters. The decision that followed would be analyzed by security professionals and historians for years to come. Rather than accepting the safety that the Queen Dowager offered, Marcus made a choice that embodied everything his grandfather had taught him about the true meaning of service.
"Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "My duty is to ensure your safe passage to the secure facility. I will maintain this position until you and Princess Isabella are safely secured. Then follow established protocols for emergency situations."
It was a diplomatic way of saying that he intended to stay behind and hold the corridor against whatever forces Lady Victoria had assembled, buying time for the royal family to reach safety, even if it meant sacrificing his own chance of survival. Princess Isabella's protest was immediate and fierce.
"Guard Thornfield, that's not a sustainable position. You cannot hold this corridor alone, against superior numbers." Marcus's response revealed the depth of thought he had given to their tactical situation. "Your Highness, I will not be alone."
Sir Edmund's people are aware of our situation, and even with communications disrupted, they will be implementing emergency protocols. My responsibility is to ensure that you reach safety before those protocols take effect.
Queen Dowager Alara studied Marcus with the penetrating gaze of someone who had spent decades reading the character and motivations of others. What she saw in his expression seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded with the dignity of someone acknowledging a fellow professional. "Very well, Guard Thornfield, but I want your word that you will not take unnecessary risks. The Crown requires loyal servants, not martyrs." The exchange was interrupted by Director Harrison's voice, now carrying the harsh edge of someone who had abandoned any pretense of civility. "I'm afraid that none of you will be going anywhere until this situation is resolved according to our requirements." The threat was now explicit and unavoidable. Lady Victoria's conspiracy had reached the point where they were prepared to physically detain members of the royal family in order to implement their objectives. The transformation from sophisticated manipulation to open coercion was complete. Marcus felt the familiar calm that had always descended upon him during moments of extreme stress. His training took over, automatically cataloging the tactical situation, identifying potential advantages and disadvantages, calculating the resources required to achieve his objectives. The corridor provided both opportunities and limitations. Its length would make it difficult for Director Harrison's forces to advance without exposing themselves to defensive action, but it also limited Marcus's own options for maneuver and retreat. The heavy furniture and architectural features offered some cover, but nothing that would provide protection against determined assault. Most importantly, the time factor was critical. Every minute that passed increased the likelihood that Sir Edmund's people would find ways to circumvent the communications jamming and coordinate an effective response. Marcus's job was not to defeat Lady Victoria's forces, it was to delay them long enough for proper authority to reassert itself. Princess Isabella seemed to understand the tactical reality as clearly as Marcus did. Rather than continuing to argue about his decision to remain behind, she focused on ensuring that their withdrawal to the secure facility would be as effective as possible. "How long do you need?" she asked, her question directed at Marcus, but her eyes already calculating the time required to reach safety. Marcus's answer was based on his assessment of the opposition forces, the defensive advantages of his position, and the probable response time for legitimate security personnel. 15 minutes should be sufficient, Your Highness. 20 would be ideal. It seemed like such a small request. 20 minutes to hold a corridor against hostile forces while two of the most important people in the kingdom reached safety. But Marcus understood, and he knew that Princess Isabella understood, that those 20 minutes might well cost him everything. Queen Dowager Alara's final words before beginning their withdrawal carried the weight of a royal blessing and a personal promise. "Guard Thornfield, your family has served the crown with distinction for 3 generations. Today, you have honored that tradition in the finest possible way." As the study door closed behind the two women and their footsteps began to fade toward the secure facility, Marcus turned his full attention to the forces arrayed against him. Director Harrison and his associates had been waiting for this moment, and their coordinated movement suggested that whatever was about to happen had been carefully planned and rehearsed. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They had assumed that Marcus Thornfield was simply a ceremonial guard, trained for parade duties and equipped with nothing more dangerous than a ceremonial sword. What they failed to understand was that every royal guard, regardless of their apparent role, was a fully trained security professional with access to both weapons and tactical resources that were not immediately visible to outside observers. As Director Harrison raised his hand to signal the final phase of their operation, Marcus activated the emergency beacon that would broadcast his exact location and tactical situation to every security facility within 50 miles. The beacon could not be jammed by conventional electronic warfare,
and its signal would bring not just Sir Edmund's people, but military response units that were specifically tasked with protecting the monarchy against exactly this type of threat. The next 20 minutes would test everything Marcus had learned about courage, duty, and the price of standing up for what was right. But as he prepared to face overwhelming odds in defense of principles that his grandfather had taught him to value above life itself, Marcus Thornfield felt the profound satisfaction of knowing that when the moment of ultimate choice had arrived, he had not been found wanting. The emergency beacon's activation sent ripples through the security infrastructure of Ravenshollow Palace that extended far beyond what Director Harrison and his associates could have anticipated. Within seconds of Marcus's signal, automated systems began implementing protocols that had been refined over decades of threat assessment and response planning. Emergency blast doors sealed critical corridors, backup communication networks activated to circumvent the jamming attempts, and response teams throughout the complex began converging on Marcus's position with the coordinated precision of a military operation. But those responses would take time to fully manifest, and Marcus found himself facing the immediate reality of holding his position against forces that had clearly prepared for exactly this contingency. Director Harrison's casual confidence suggested that he and his team had studied the palace's defensive capabilities and believed they could achieve their objectives before legitimate security forces could mount an effective response. Marcus drew his sidearm, not the ceremonial weapon that visitors might expect, but a modern tactical pistol that represented the latest in protective technology. His movement was fluid and practiced, the result of countless hours of training that every royal guard underwent regardless of their apparent ceremonial role. The weapon's appearance in his hands seemed to surprise Director Harrison's associates, several of whom exchanged glances that suggested they had indeed underestimated the defensive capabilities they were facing. "Director Harrison," Marcus called out, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had made peace with the consequences of his choices. "You have approximately 18 minutes before this corridor becomes untenable for your operation. I strongly recommend that you reconsider your current course of action." The warning was both a tactical assessment and a final opportunity for the conspirators to withdraw before the situation escalated beyond any hope of peaceful resolution. But Director Harrison's response made it clear that retreat was not an option they were prepared to consider. "Guard Thornfield," Harrison replied, his voice now devoid of any pretense of official authority, and carrying instead the hard edge of someone accustomed to violence. "You are outnumbered and outgunned. Your position is admirable, but ultimately futile. Stand down now, and you may survive what comes next." Marcus's response was informed by everything his grandfather had taught him about the nature of true courage. "Director Harrison, my grandfather once told me that a man's worth is measured not by the odds he faces, but by his willingness to face them in defense of what matters most. Today, I learned what he meant." The philosophical exchange ended as Director Harrison gestured to his associates, who began moving with the coordinated precision of individuals trained in small unit tactics. Their approach was methodical and professional, suggesting military or specialized law enforcement backgrounds that made them far more dangerous than common criminals or opportunistic conspirators. Marcus's defensive position at the intersection of two corridors provided both advantages and limitations. The architectural features of the palace, heavy stone columns, ornate furniture, and reinforced doorways, offered substantial cover, but the open spaces required careful movement to avoid exposure to crossfire from multiple directions. His training had prepared him for exactly these types of scenarios, but the reality of facing them alone, with the lives of the royal family dependent on his success, added layers of psychological pressure that no simulation could replicate. The first exchange of gunfire shattered the centuries-old silence of Ravenshollow Palace's corridors with shocking violence. Marcus's position behind a massive marble column provided protection as bullets splintered wood paneling and shattered crystal fixtures that had witnessed generations of royal history. The sound was deafening in the confined space, and he could hear the distant activation of emergency alarms as automated systems detected the breach of palace security. But Marcus also heard something else. The distinctive sound of reinforced doors sealing throughout the complex as the palace's emergency protocols isolated critical areas and began channeling potential threats away from the most sensitive locations. The system was working exactly as designed, buying precious time for response forces to organize while limiting the conspirators' ability to expand their operation beyond the immediate area. Director Harrison's voice carried over the echoes of gunfire, now stripped of any pretense of civility or legitimacy. "Thornfield, you're prolonging the inevitable. We have resources and planning that go far beyond what you can imagine. Surrender now and we can discuss terms. Marcus's response was a carefully placed shot that sent Harrison and his associates scrambling for better cover, while demonstrating that the palace guard's marksmanship training was more than adequate for the current situation. The message was clear. Any advance would come at considerable cost, and time was working against the attackers rather than in their favor.
The tactical situation evolved rapidly as both sides adapted to the realities of combat within the ornate but functionally complex environment of the palace corridors. Marcus found that his intimate knowledge of the area's layout provided significant advantages, allowing him to anticipate angles of attack and utilize architectural features in ways that his opponents, despite their apparent preparation, had not fully considered. A communications device crackled to life somewhere behind Harrison's position, indicating that the conspirators were receiving updates from other elements of their operation. The brief exchange that Marcus could overhear suggested that their timeline was being compressed by developments they had not anticipated, a realization that brought both hope and concern. Hope, because it implied that Sir Edmund's security forces were successfully countering the broader conspiracy despite the communications jamming. Concern, because desperate individuals facing the collapse of their plans often resort to increasingly extreme measures to salvage their objectives. Princess Isabella's voice suddenly echoed through the corridor, transmitted via the palace's internal announcement system that apparently operated on frequencies the jamming could not affect. All palace personnel, this is Princess Isabella. We are currently experiencing a security emergency involving unauthorized individuals claiming false authority. All legitimate security personnel are instructed to implement Protocol 7 immediately. Protocol 7 was the palace's highest level of internal security response, reserved for situations where the royal family faced direct threats from within the complex itself. Its implementation would bring every available security resource to bear on the crisis while simultaneously locking down all non-essential areas and activating direct communication with military command authorities. The announcement had an immediate effect on the tactical situation. Harrison's forces, who had been advancing methodically toward Marcus's position, suddenly found themselves facing the prospect of confronting not just a single determined guard, but the full weight of the palace's security apparatus mobilizing against them. Marcus could hear the sound of approaching footsteps echoing from multiple directions, the rapid, coordinated movement of professional security personnel responding to the Protocol 7 alert. The timing suggested that Sir Edmund's people had successfully circumvented the communications jamming and were now implementing the comprehensive response that the situation demanded. Director Harrison seemed to recognize that his window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Rather than attempting to continue the methodical advance that had characterized their initial approach, his forces suddenly shifted to a more aggressive assault, designed to overwhelm Marcus's position through sheer firepower and coordinated movement. The intensity of the attack was overwhelming, with gunfire coming from 3 different angles as Harrison's associates attempted to suppress Marcus's defensive capabilities while advancing toward his position. The marble column that had provided his primary protection began showing serious damage under the concentrated assault, with chips and fragments of stone creating a deadly hail of secondary projectiles. Marcus found himself drawing on reserves of training and determination that he had never been forced to access before. His return fire was careful and deliberate, designed to disrupt the attacker's coordination while conserving ammunition for the critical moments when precise shooting would mean the difference between success and failure. The sound of an explosion from somewhere deeper in the palace complex sent shockwaves through the immediate area, causing both sides to pause momentarily as they tried to assess this new development. Marcus realized with growing concern that the conspiracy was apparently far more extensive than anyone had initially understood. If Harrison's people had the resources to implement multiple simultaneous operations throughout the palace, then the threat to the royal family was more serious than even his worst estimates had suggested. But the explosion also brought an immediate change in the tactical situation. The sound of running footsteps grew rapidly closer, and Marcus could distinguish the disciplined cadence of legitimate security personnel from the more chaotic movements of individuals responding to unexpected developments. Sir Edmund Worthington's voice suddenly echoed through the corridor, transmitted via a portable communication system that had apparently overcome the jamming attempts. All hostile forces in the East Wing corridor, this is Sir Edmund Worthington, head of Royal Protection Services. You are surrounded and have no viable escape routes. Surrender immediately, and you may be treated according to established protocols for prisoners. The offer was both tactically sound and strategically brilliant. By providing Harrison's forces with a clear choice between surrender and continued resistance, Sir Edmund was giving them an opportunity to end the confrontation before it escalated to even more dangerous levels, while simultaneously demonstrating to his own personnel that proper procedures would be followed, even under extreme circumstances. Director Harrison's response revealed the depth of commitment that had driven the conspiracy from its beginning. Rather than accepting the offer of surrender or attempting to negotiate terms, he made a choice that transformed the situation from a failed coup attempt into something approaching a siege. "Sir Edmund," Harrison called out, his voice carrying the desperate edge of someone who had crossed too many lines to consider turning back, "you are interfering with a legitimate security operation authorized at the highest levels of government. Stand down or face the consequences of obstructing national security measures." It was a final attempt to maintain the facade of legitimacy that had characterized the conspiracy from its beginning. But the circumstances had progressed far beyond the point where such claims could be credible. The violence, the unauthorized presence in secured areas, the refusal to submit to proper verification procedures, all of it had destroyed any possibility that reasonable people could mistake Harrison's operation for anything other than what it truly was. Sir Edmund's response carried the weight of decades of experience in dealing with threats to the monarchy. "Director Harrison, if that is indeed your name, you have 30 seconds to surrender your weapons and submit to proper processing. After that time, my personnel will implement measures designed to end this situation definitively." Marcus felt a surge of professional respect for Sir Edmund's handling of the crisis. By providing specific timelines and clear ultimatums, the head of Royal Protection Services was demonstrating the kind of leadership and tactical judgment that had made him legendary within security circles. More importantly, he was giving Marcus and any other personnel in the immediate area clear expectations about what was about to happen. The 30 seconds stretched like hours as both sides prepared for what appeared to be the final phase of the confrontation. Marcus could hear the subtle sounds of tactical equipment being readied, the whispered communications between team members, and the almost inaudible movement of personnel positioning themselves for maximum effectiveness. Harrison's final decision, when it came, revealed a level of desperation that made him more dangerous than ever. Rather than surrendering or attempting to escape, he chose to escalate the confrontation in ways that threatened not just the immediate participants, but the broader stability of the monarchy itself. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the corridor as one of Harrison's associates threw what appeared to be an incendiary device toward the area where priceless artifacts and historical documents were stored. The implication was clear. If they could not achieve their original objectives, they were prepared to cause maximum damage to the institution they had claimed to be protecting. Marcus's response was immediate and decisive. Abandoning the defensive position that had served him throughout the confrontation, he moved toward the threat with the determination of someone who understood that some things were worth any sacrifice to protect. His actions would be analyzed by security professionals for years to come, but in that moment, they were guided by nothing more complex than the oath he had sworn and the example his grandfather had set. The next few minutes would determine not just the outcome of the immediate crisis, but the future of the monarchy itself. Because, in choosing to risk everything to protect the physical and symbolic treasures that represented centuries of royal history, Marcus Thornfield was making a statement about the values that truly mattered when everything else had been stripped away. The sound of Sir Edmund's tactical teams moving into final position provided a counterpoint to the chaos of the incendiary device's impact. Professional, disciplined, and absolutely committed to ending the threat, they represented the best traditions of service to the crown. But whether their intervention would come in time to prevent irreparable damage remained to be seen. As Marcus moved through smoke and debris toward an uncertain fate, he carried with him the accumulated wisdom of 3 generations of palace guards who had understood that true service sometimes required the ultimate sacrifice. Whether his actions would be remembered as heroic or simply necessary would be determined by others, but he knew with absolute certainty that he had chosen correctly when faced with the defining moment of his life. The acrid smoke from the incendiary device mixed with the ancient dust of centuries to create an atmosphere that seemed to embody the collision between destruction and preservation that had defined the entire crisis. Marcus moved through the haze, with the determination of someone who had found his true purpose in the most unlikely of circumstances. His training guiding him toward the threat, even as common sense screamed warnings about the dangers he was facing. The device had landed near a display case containing original manuscripts signed by monarchs dating back 500 years, documents that represented not just historical artifacts, but the living continuity of the institution Marcus had sworn to protect. The flames were spreading with alarming speed, consuming irreplaceable treasures that could never be recovered or replaced. Marcus's fire suppression training kicked in automatically as he reached the burning area. Every palace guard received extensive instruction in protecting the countless priceless artifacts that filled Raven's Hollow's corridors,
and he moved with practiced efficiency to contain the damage. But as he worked to smother the flames, he remained acutely aware that Director Harrison and his associates were still active threats who would not hesitate to exploit his distraction. Sir Edmund's tactical teams chose that moment to implement their final assault, moving with the coordinated precision that had made them legendary throughout the security community. The sound of their entry was overwhelming. Flashbang grenades designed to disorient resistance, the sharp commands of professional operators, implementing well-rehearsed procedures, and the inevitable crash of furniture and fixtures as the corridor became a battlefield. Through the chaos, Marcus could hear Director Harrison's voice raised in what sounded like genuine panic, rather than the calculated authority that had characterized his earlier communications. The facade of professional competence was cracking under the pressure of facing opponents who were not only better trained and equipped, but who possessed the absolute moral authority that comes from defending legitimate institutions against illegitimate threats. All hostiles down. Corridor secured. The announcement came from one of Sir Edmund's team leaders, transmitted via communication systems that had apparently overcome all attempts at jamming. The words carried the profound relief of professionals who had successfully completed an extremely dangerous mission without losing any of their own personnel. Marcus continued his fire suppression efforts even as tactical teams swept the area around him, ensuring that no secondary threats remained active. The flames were finally under control. But the damage to the historical documents was significant. Centuries of royal history had been reduced to ash and smoke in a matter of minutes, sacrificed to the desperation of individuals who had claimed to be acting in the monarchy's best interests. Sir Edmund Worthington appeared through the dissipating smoke like a figure from Marcus's most optimistic fantasies. The head of Royal Protection Services moved with the controlled urgency of someone assessing damage, while simultaneously coordinating the broader response to what had clearly been a multifaceted attack on the palace's security. "Guard Thornfield," Sir Edmund said, his voice carrying both professional assessment and personal concern. "Report on your status and that of the protected individuals." Marcus's response was automatic, the result of years of training in proper procedures even under extreme circumstances. Sir Edmund, Her Majesty the Queen Dowager, and Princess Isabella were successfully evacuated to the secure facility approximately 22 minutes ago. I maintained defensive position as ordered and implemented fire suppression measures when historical artifacts were threatened. Sir Edmund's examination of Marcus was thorough and professional, checking for injuries while simultaneously assessing the guard's psychological state after what had clearly been a traumatic experience. "Outstanding work, Guard Thornfield. Your actions today have prevented what could have been a catastrophic breach of royal security." But even as he spoke these words of commendation, Sir Edmund's attention was focused on the broader implications of what had just transpired. The attack on Raven's Hollow Palace represented not just a failed coup attempt, but a fundamental challenge to the security assumptions that had protected the monarchy for decades. The level of coordination, resources, and inside knowledge displayed by the conspirators suggested threats that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. Princess Isabella's voice echoed through the corridor via the internal communication system, now restored to full functionality with the elimination of the jamming devices. "Sir Edmund, this is Princess Isabella. We are requesting immediate status update on Guard Thornfield and the situation in the East Wing." The concern in her voice was unmistakable, reflecting not just the natural anxiety of someone who had been forced to abandon a loyal protector in a dangerous situation, but the genuine personal regard that had developed between the royal family and the man who had risked everything to ensure their safety. Sir Edmund activated his communication device to respond directly to Princess Isabella's inquiry. "Your Highness, Guard Thornfield is secure and uninjured. The immediate threat has been neutralized, and we are implementing comprehensive security sweeps throughout the complex." Marcus found himself reflecting on the profound changes that had occurred in his understanding of duty, service, and moral courage over the course of a single day. When he had awakened that morning, he had believed that his greatest challenge would be maintaining proper posture during ceremonial duties. Instead, he had been forced to make decisions that challenged everything he thought he understood about loyalty, authority, and the pair.